Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Kicks and Picks podcast. We are continuing our summer series of State of the Club, and this episode is going to be focused on Manchester United. Lucky for us, we have an expert joining us. It's Colin Damms from the Busby Babe and the Fergie Fledglings podcast. Colin, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the podcast. How's everything going so far?
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Scott. Yeah, things are going pretty good. Went to the United Arsenal game in New York this past weekend. Gonna see them in Vegas. Got to meet a couple players last weekend too. That was pretty cool. So yeah, just excited for a new season to start, even though it feels like the last one just ended.
Yeah, you are one of the fortunate clubs you guys get to see on the preseason tour in the States this summer. Something that we've kind of missed in recent years a little bit, especially with COVID, but happy to kind of see some of these guys coming back over, getting the opportunity to see them, although in preseason form, still get to see them in person nonetheless. So yeah, United won that game against Arsenal, right? I think 2-0, had some decent goals.
Yeah, Bruno Fernandes and Jadon Sancho both scored. It was, I think Arsenal played their first team for like 80 minutes, which was kind of weird, but also, take whatever chance you get to those players. And yeah, they looked fresh. Yeah, excited for the new year. A couple of new players coming in that we're excited about, and yeah, ready to get going.
Yeah, it doesn't help to get a little bit of momentum building under in the summer months at the very least. But yeah, I think maybe we can kind of kick things off coming off a pretty decent season for United. I know, it didn't quite finish how it kind of looked like it could potentially, as late in the season as like February, but still got some silverware. You did win the Carabao Cup. No matter what people say about it, it's a trophy. It counts. So always good to get a little something to put in the cabinet back at the training ground. You finished third in the Premier League behind a Manchester City, who are always the top, and then Arsenal, who had a pretty resurgent season themselves. So maybe caught a little bit out by a right time, right place squad in Arsenal. Had a very disappointing end with that loss in the FA Cup to City. Would have secured a domestic double, and were knocked out of the Europa League by eventual champion Sevilla. We talked about in this podcast, whenever Sevilla are in Europa League, they're a different team. I think they finished in like mid-table in La Liga, but it doesn't really matter when it comes to them in Europa. So no real shame in that one.
I mean, when we played them, I think they were like 17th in La Liga or 16th. Like they were still hovering around the relegation zone. That's just their competition. It's if you come up against Sevilla, you can't make any mistakes, and that's exactly what United did.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and it's not even like it's the same manager. They've switched managers a few times during that time period. It's just they have some sort of weird Europa voodoo magic that takes them to another level when they're playing in that competition. But with all that said, what was your real assessment on the season last year? Were you happy with how things turned out? Were you left a little bit dissatisfied, especially with that FA Cup loss? What's your general assessment of the season as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, losing a cup final just leaves a bad taste in your mouth. I mean, I remember seasons when they won the Premier League and then they lost in the Champions League final, and it felt like a failure, even though we would kill to have that sort of season again now. But yeah, it's one of those where if you presented us with it at the beginning of the season, you would absolutely take it. Winning a trophy, qualifying for Europe again, and overall just having a nice first season under a new manager after what's felt like a never-ending series of managers coming in and out, identity crises, you name it. With Manchester United, they've just not had things figured out after Sir Alex Ferguson. There have been times, like under Solskjaer, where it seems like they were headed in the right direction, which is why, there's reason to be wary of some of the slip-ups towards the end of last season. The FA Cup final, one of them, losing to Sevilla, another. Some of those losses on the road, Manchester City and Liverpool, both awful road games in the Premier League. So things to keep tabs on, but overall, I think a pretty positive campaign.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, where it's, compared to some of the turmoil they've been through in recent seasons, any sort of, glimmer of hope would have been a welcome sign. And I think there was going to be plenty of patience with Ten Hag regardless, but, him getting a trophy basically mid-season is enough to kind of get everyone to buy in. Talking about the squad makeup a little bit more, you started the season with Cristiano Ronaldo, didn't quite make it through the full season. Were there, glimmers of or were there players that kind of stood out to you as like positive signs as, hey, these are guys that we're going to be able to build around? And were there any players that maybe aside from Ronaldo that were maybe a little bit more disappointing in the way that they performed over the season?
Definitely ones that I was impressed by. Lissandro Martinez, coming in his first year, there was all of this talk from, that Jamie Carragher is the one that everyone looks at because he's a former Liverpool player. But it was a lot of people in the media were questioning whether a 5'6", 5'7" player could play center back in the Premier League. And from the get go, he looked, totally in his element. He looked comfortable. He had a really good game against Liverpool that, got United a win to kind of steer things in the right direction early in the season. And I think you saw late in the year when he got injured and they had to go the last month and a half or so without him, just how important he had become. As a passer, he was crucial for playing around some of David De Gea's weaknesses. So, speaking of disappointing players, that was something they had to figure out defensively, and something, Varane wasn't totally comfortable with either because he wasn't used to playing that way at Real Madrid. He had good ball progressors around him and in midfield, and that just wasn't really his style. But playing next to Lissandro Martinez made him more comfortable, made De Gea more comfortable, and it allowed Luke Shaw to kind of get forward and do his thing as well. So that was definitely probably the one who impressed me and caught me by surprise. Marcus Rashford, another one though.
Yeah.
Really considering the season that he had the year before, there's questions about whether he even wanted to stay around at United. I mean, obviously he loves the club. It was his boyhood club, but when you're that heavily criticized in the media for poor performances, it makes sense to question your future a little bit. And he really answered the critics, both for United and England last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think Marcus Rashford had a vein of form where he was like scoring or assisting a goal in like 8 or 9 consecutive matches or something crazy like that. He really caught
Yeah,
us.
he only had like one brace, which was really weird because it was like that stretch from January to March, you
Yeah,
get
yeah,
one Marcus Rashford goal a game pretty much. And yeah, it was they didn't come in bunches in one game or two games. He really spread out those 30 goals.
yeah. I mean, he really got his money's worth out of that one stretch of time there, and I think we did pretty well with it because we kind of caught the wave, and we were taking like United with like both teams to score, or United or Rashford like anytime goal scorer pretty regularly, and he always came through. So yeah, and I guess maybe on that reverse side, were there any players that maybe were left as like, disappointments to you, or maybe you thought that you had higher expectations and then they didn't quite, meet them, that maybe you're looking for like a rebound season coming into this year?
Yeah, I guess two that we really needed to shine and they just didn't were David De Gea and Anthony Martial. Martial, a little bit unfair maybe in the criticism of him because he just couldn't stay healthy, but they say the best ability is availability in the sports world, and Martial just has not had that over the last few seasons. And then David De Gea, will be remembered rightfully as a great Manchester United goalkeeper. It's been really sad to see somebody who, for a good stretch of time, was the only player who could probably qualify as world class in the United squad. Yeah. And just the decline in form over the last couple of years has been sad to watch. There have been moments where he kind of stabilized. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, Erik ten Hag kind of realized that there were ways they could play around his weaknesses on the ball, weaknesses when it comes to challenging crosses, playing out passes, things like that. And it worked for a time, but it became pretty evident that was a player they needed to move on from. And, thankfully they had the wherewithal to do that quickly this summer. And maybe there were some negatives to the way that they handled it, that kind of upset some fans in terms of respecting De Gea, but overall it was the right move to move on from him.
And Anthony was a player that came in last summer, was a big signing. I think he played 20 plus matches in the Premier League, but maybe the return wasn't as great in terms of like actual goals produced. Were you happy with, his season as a whole, or do you think he's just kind of taking some time to adjust to Premier League? What was your assessment of where his performances were on the season?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was particularly happy. He's kind of a divisive player amongst United fans because there's very clear evidence that he's a good dribbler who takes the ball forward, and that's something that United wingers haven't always done well. There's some who prefer to kind of stick around up top. He probably defends a little bit more than Jadon Sancho or Rashford does, and his energy is really important too. But he's definitely a scorer of great goals. He can bend it in like Arjen Robben, and it's fantastic to watch. But there are some times where it's like you have a right foot as well, Anthony. Like you can take it to the byline and you can play a pass across, or you can take a touch and cross it. You don't have to dribble past everyone. It's just hopefully a case of figuring out where he fits in the team and what he needs to do in the moment, because there were times where he was a very good player, and he showed promise of the 80 million pound price tag that was paid for him. But yeah, still definitely kind of caught in the middle on him for now.
Yeah, I think that's almost kind of a common thing that happens a lot of times with some of these younger Brazilian players, where they have that class and maybe that little bit of flair, and they have those worldies that they kind of pull out from time to time, where you can really see what their potential is. But getting them to fit into whatever system the manager's trying to play, especially when they're young. I think Anthony's 22, 23 still. They're still trying to figure out, what their professional, approach will have to be. And sometimes those are the growing pains you have to deal with. But yeah, I think, with time, he's going to be a really strong player for United moving forward. You mentioned that, it's been a tumultuous time, trying to find the replacement for Sir Alex Ferguson. Ten Hag came in last summer. I think there was a lot of optimism around him, especially what he managed to do at Ajax and his previous stints. Where do you stand with him as the manager right now? Are you really happy with where he's going? Would you like to see him at the club for many, many years? Or are you still taking some time to assess and see, what his ultimate, turnout is going to be in as a manager of Manchester United?
I've been really happy with his first season. I think more than anything, it seems like the discipline is back a little bit. There was that story earlier in the year where Rashford was late for practice and he was benched for the next game. Came off the bench, scored a goal. Was asked about it post game and was like, "Yeah, this is how it is." And you have to follow the rules. There's no exceptions, even for the most important players, like someone who had scored in 5 straight games. So that's been really positive to see. There's been all sorts of reports as well. So Carl Anka was talking about this on the Athletics Man United pod last week, that previously there have been these players like Paul Pogba or Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Romelu Lukaku for a time, I think was looked up to this way, that were kind of the leaders in the dressing room. They controlled the dressing room and they were very influential when it came to kind of swaying the way that the squad felt about things. Now it's, it seems like it's Eric It seems like it's Eric Ten Hag's dressing room. Can get tripped up over his name every now and then. But
Yeah,
he just he commands respect from the players, that it's helped him in those situations, like Cristiano Ronaldo, the way that he left.
yeah,
That very
exactly.
easily could have derailed United's form. It could have been a media storm in all sorts of ways. In a way, it was a blessing that it happened right before the World Cup, because by the time they got back, they'd gotten over it. But United didn't miss a beat when they got back. They were like, we don't have a center forward that's healthy, but we're going to figure out a way to do it. Marcus Rashford is going to be our primary source of goals. And they just ran with it, because you have to have that attitude of, when things get tough, things don't stop. The Premier League season is very long and it's very grueling. And you have to have the attitude and the discipline to get through it. And I think that's been a positive from Eric Ten Hag. So I'm really looking forward to what else happens. There's an overall vision you can kind of see in the way that they recruit. Things just they feel a lot more positive than they have for some time.
Yeah, I think that seminal moment, it seems, was that how Ten Hag handled Cristiano Ronaldo, because it was very evident to pretty much anybody that was watching United games on a regular basis. United looked a better team when Ronaldo was not on the pitch, and
Mhm.
Cristiano Ronaldo is a massive figure, not just in world football, but also in world sport, right? He's as recognizable of an athlete as you can find in the world right now. But he also means a lot to Manchester United, particularly obviously coming through the ranks there during Alex Ferguson's time. So it's such a delicate situation that has to be handled where it's like, we have to do what's best for the club. No one person is bigger than the club. Everyone always says it. And if there's a time to prove it, it's with a guy like Cristiano Ronaldo. And so I thought for him to kind of handle it the way that he did, obviously Ronaldo did not look that great going out the door. He had some of his, storming off the pitch moments. But to
Yeah,
me, that was
yeah,
kind of when we all took note and we're like, oh, Ten Hag is, at least from the man management standpoint, he's the real deal. And as long as he has the tactics, which he showed at Ajax, he does, he's probably going to be around at United for a while.
yeah. I think it helped Ten Hag's case that kind of from the start of his first season in the summer, Cristiano Ronaldo very clearly did not want to stay. There were reports. His agent Jorge Mendes is no, he will talk to the media. People know that.
Yeah.
And there, he was linked with pretty much every club that qualified for the Champions League. He was even linked with going back to Sporting, and it became pretty clear that nobody wanted to pay the money that it would take to get him. And we know that for a fact because they had the chance to do it for free. They had the chance to do it without paying a transfer fee. Just give him the outlandish wages that he wants, and nobody bit. So I think Erik ten Hag kind of realized he maybe had the upper hand in that, and that he didn't really have to say that much. He just had to let Cristiano Ronaldo show everyone who he really was. And, he kept the composure to keep the dressing room, and the players supported him. And, they had a really good season after that. And it was a big deal because they lost one of the only players who could play center forward in a squad that does not have a lot of center forwards, which is remains a need for them.
Yeah. And hey, listen, that's a great segue because I think now that we kind of have the assessment of the season that was, we can get to the season that is now, which is transfer season. United have been a little bit busy. They made some moves already. They've got Mason Mount in from Chelsea. I'm going to address some of their midfield needs there. Andre Onana is the recent name that's come in, going to be replacing David De Gea. I should say Golden Glove winner David De Gea. So still some big shoes to fill there, despite his declining in performance. There's also rumors of Rasmus Højlund from Atalanta maybe being looked at around 60 million pounds. It's kind of, if the fee is right, it seems like he'll be a good fit. What's been your opinion so far of the business that United have managed to get gotten done so far, and what are some of the holes that you think still need to be filled?
I think it's smart spending on players who immediately raise the floor of the team. Mason Mount is most likely an immediate upgrade on Christian Eriksen and the role that he played last season. Not to speak ill of Christian Eriksen because, he's a beloved figure for a reason. He's a very good player. He's overcome a lot to, get back to playing at a high level in his career. But he is getting older, and we kind of saw towards the end of the season that he doesn't have a full 90 for 50 games in him anymore. So, that you have Christian Eriksen as a depth piece. You have Mason Mount to probably start most games. And he's a very good player. I think it would be hard to judge any Chelsea player based on last season because,
it's a very good point.
Indescribable mess at that club over the end of that campaign. But previously, Mount had been a very, very good player for them. He's very creative. He's a hard worker, and he listens to the manager's directions, which Erik ten Hag likes in players. So yeah, excited about him. Andre Onana has big gloves to fill, like you mentioned. We don't know a whole lot about how he's going to be as a shot stopper, but in terms of what Erik ten Hag wants goalkeepers to do, and in terms of what modern goalkeepers are asked to do, he's right up there with some of the best in Europe. So the attention will be on him if mistakes are made, but it seems like he has the talent to pull through. And then I guess the other good thing about those is that they didn't have to spend an outrageous amount of money on either. They paid about what people valued those players at. They didn't have to get into really big bidding wars, and all of that is important because they're really restrained by financial fair play after the Antony deal last summer. Both the Antony and Casemiro deals. the credit card is almost maxed out. So they really have to be smart with their money. And I think they got two players so far who, were within their budget and they immediately make the team better. So hopefully they can do that with Hoyland, another really talented young player. Not a £100 million striker yet, but you kind of want to, Paulie Questel from my podcast, he likes to say you like to find the £100 million striker before you have to pay £100 million.
He's
So
only 22. It's like he's got plenty of time to develop into that. If you have a guy that's 100 million pounds before the age of like 23, then I mean that's a real player. That's like Mbappe level.
yeah, I mean, we'd all love to have Harry Kane, Victor Osimhen, one of those guys. That would be incredible. But the next best thing is to find somebody within your budget who can become one of those players.
Sure.
So yeah,
Yeah.
excited. It sounds like we might get the Fiorentina midfielder Sofiane Amrabat as well.
Oh, Amrabat. Yeah.
He's
solid, but he's good for him and Casemiro would be an interesting pairing because like both of those guys are good for a card at least once a match.
Yeah. So I mean, look, Casemiro has a bit of a reputation now in England. Whether they were all deserved or not, he was suspended on 3 separate occasions. Yeah. So having somebody who can fill that role, who is more competent on the ball than Scott McTominay, nothing against Scott McTominay. We love him. He's a very passionate player, but he's not Casemiro.
Yeah, they can just rotate through when they're suspended on red cards. One guy goes out, next guy steps right in. Don't miss a beat. I got some good news for you. We had Nimata Valley Rudsari on for our Inter State of the Pod a couple of weeks ago, and he spoke glowingly about Andre Onana. So I know you said remains to be seen what you're getting from him on a shot stopper basis, but he looked really good when he was with Ten Hag at Ajax, and I don't think there's any reason why he can't at least get to that form, if not better, with Manchester United.
Yeah, the thing with goalkeepers is a lot of it is about confidence, and to be starting for a club playing in the Champions League from the age of 19, and then last season to have the campaign that he did in the Champions League to get to the final with Inter, it really seems like he's on the cusp of being one of those really big goalkeepers in the game of football, and that's what United need.
Yeah, we kind of talked about who he's replacing. David De Gea had, I think, 17 clean sheets. Is that right? Last season.
Yeah.
So a pretty solid return there. Obviously, goalkeepers are not the only reason why clean sheets occur. Harry Maguire also expected to depart. He's at least been stripped of his captaincy, which usually leads to maybe it's time for us to go our separate ways type of discussion. Do you see any loss there aside from just the on the pitch performance from either of these players, or do you see like more of a hole in terms of what they leave behind in the locker room?
I mean, Harry Maguire is a well-respected player in the dressing room. That's part of why Solskjaer gave him the captain's armband only 5 months into his United career. And he's a very vocal player. He yells a lot. If you watch those games from the COVID season, you can hear him yelling words that probably should not be repeated here. But a very vocal player on the back line. But the thing about him is they already kind of replaced him last season. He didn't start anywhere near as many games as he had the previous seasons in his United career. It does look like, if he's not on the way out, he's going to have to be okay with coming off the bench and maybe fighting for a spot if something happens with Varane, who has had injury problems. So having a backup as experienced as Maguire is nice to have. But if somebody offers you £50 million for your backup center back, you'd probably take that too. So I think United are going to be shrewd with their negotiating tactics on Harry Maguire, but it definitely seems that they're open to losing him. And I think the defense will be okay. I don't hate Harry Maguire like a lot of United fans do. I think he's absorbed a lot of the blame for that should have been shared the season 2 years ago, but he's in really poor form. And if United isn't going to give him the opportunity to find that form again, it's probably best for him as a player to find somewhere else.
If they get 40-50 million pounds for him, do you think they go out and get another center back to replace him, or do you think they're good with what they have now?
I would say they probably offer a contract to Johnny Evans. He's been with the squad for preseason training. It seems like everything's gone well, and the Eric Tenaga is open to giving him a contract if it comes to that. They just have too many other needs in the transfer window right now. There's probably some players at the youth level that they could look to as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I could also see them looking for another left-footed center back because Eric Tenaga really likes the symmetry on the back line, which is why when Martinez did get hurt, Luke Shaw kind of filled in at center back instead of Harry Maguire or Victor Lindelof in that spot. He really likes having left-footed players on the left side of defense. So they maybe could go in that direction. Although I don't think we're going to get Joško Gvardiol or anyone, anyone like that.
I think he's a deadlock to go to City at this point, which is unfortunate because that's the definition of the rich get richer.
Yeah, he's probably the next best defender in the world.
Speaking of rich getting richer, we've got perhaps maybe the most prolonged club sale in history, it seems, with the Glazers looking to maybe finally offload their ownership stake in Manchester United. There's two bids that we know about. It's the Qatari bid with Sheikh Jassim. And then there's Jim Ratcliffe, who I believe is a Manchester United fan, working with Ineos.
He certainly says that he's a United fan.
Do you think the sale actually gets done? Because I know there's been a lot of delays. There's been lots of, media rumors, which who knows how much truth there is, probably very little, around maybe the Glazers aren't actually looking to do a full sale or are looking just for like a minority stake investment. What do you think ultimately happens with everything that's going on in the Glazers sale world right now?
Yeah, so the other big name from interested parties is the Rain Group, which is it's kind of like a Wall Street investment fund. They were interested when the Chelsea deal went down. There were there are a ton of other like hedge fund people who are interested in the club, I'm sure, that have not put on the PR campaign that Qatar or Jim Ratcliffe have. Though it does unfortunately seem like if there's a full buyout, it's going to be one of those two. Neither feels like a great option as a fan, to be honest. There's all sorts of reasons that smarter people will talk about when it comes to state ownership of a club. And then Jim Ratcliffe, what are his intentions of buying Manchester United? Are they really as nice as he says they are, or is this kind of another way to bring in people like the Glazers who are more interested in the dividends that come with owning a Premier League football club? That this is an incredible amount of money at stake here. So I think anyone's intentions in buying Manchester United outright should be questioned. But I think that the Glazers are probably more divided than maybe is being publicized about this. Otherwise,
Family matters often are.
Yeah. I mean, there's like 5 or 6 siblings and cousins and whatnot deciding on what to do with these shares. I do think, though, that the two brothers, Joel and Avram, yeah, I think the two brothers would like to hold on to theirs, which is probably the most important part of the family in terms of deciding. So I would say the most likely outcome to me feels like it's going to be the Rain Group. But again, I'm not an insider. I don't know all this information. I'm just basing this off of, people who very well could have sold the club by now for an outrageous amount of money. And for whatever reason, they've decided to hold on this long and draw it out.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it's very often that you see fans now kind of have this, ownership out mentality when things aren't going well. And we certainly saw a good amount of that with Manchester United and the Glazers over the years. I'm curious to see if this comes to pass and the Glazers truly do sell their stake and give over majority ownership, what that next group looks like. Because if we see anything with Chelsea, just because you're getting a new ownership doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have, the club success that you'd expect to come with it.
Yeah, I think Chelsea and PSG are both the examples of money does not solve all your problems. In fact, it can create them because both of those clubs are going to have, financial fair play problems to deal with down the line as well.
Everton
like
too.
City have. Yeah. So yeah, it's really hard to think about because there's no clarity over it, and a club the size of Manchester United, if it's suddenly awarded that sort of spending power, I mean, is it even going to feel real anymore, or is it just going to be like someone playing FIFA
Yeah.
with the negotiation difficulty turned down?
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting too, because at that point it's like, between City and Newcastle and whoever else comes in, like it won't just be United with that amount of money. It will be interesting to see because
Right.
it almost becomes almost like a super league type deal where you have
Right.
4 or 5 clubs in one league that all have this, you know, almost like a cheat code level of money. So will be something to keep an eye on for sure. Looking ahead, we will acknowledge that we are just approaching the end of July, not yet into August, so still plenty left to play out before the Premier League season kicks off. Well, let's talk about some expectations, maybe some goals for the upcoming season. What do you think are some realistic expectations that fans can have from this Manchester United team going into the 2023-2024 campaign?
I think the expectations every year just to compete in whatever competition you can. I mean, Wayne Rooney said some time ago. I mean, this was back when Sir Alex Ferguson was still manager, but he was asked a question sort of similar to that about the League Cup after being knocked out, and it was like, can you focus more on the Premier League now, things like that. And he just pretty blankly said, when you're at Manchester United, you're supposed to win everything every year, and that's certainly the expectation fans would still like to have, but it is unfortunately no longer the reality. Um, I think hang in the Premier League as long as you can with City. Liverpool probably are back. It seems like they won 9 out of their last 10 games of the Premier League season. They're like Austin Powers when he got his mojo back. This is
Yeah,
this is a
they
very
evolved a
scary
little.
Liverpool team. They also got Dominic Soboslai from RB Leipzig, Alexi McAllister coming in from Brighton. That reloads a midfield that was pretty lacking last season, and the rest of the way they've got Darwin Nunez has a season under his belt. He got some of the awkwardness out of the way, and he started playing better. Mo Salah is world class. He's always going to be there. Cody Gakpo, there's a reason Man United wanted
Yeah,
really,
he
really
showed it in
badly.
that 7-0 win too. I mean,
Yeah,
Gakpo, that may have been his best game.
he certainly did. The Monday after that game, we had our friend of our podcast, Mark Kastner, who writes for the Liverpool SB
Yeah.
Nation podcast. And I'm sure we were the only Man United podcast that was willing to talk to a Liverpool fan after that. But yeah, he had a lot of fun with us with that one. But yeah, I expect City, will for the foreseeable future be number one. I think Liverpool is going to be back up there challenging, and with Arsenal, maybe the way they stumbled last season means something, but they certainly didn't get weaker with this transfer window they're having.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
unless
they've spent the most so
Havertz,
far, right? They've got
yeah,
at least 50 million more than the next best club from what I can remember.
yeah, I'm not sure that they're done yet, and it's another question with Newcastle. Are they getting better? Are they making lateral moves with some of these transfers? Either way, I mean, they're a very tough nut to crack when it comes to playing defense and playing well in midfield. Things are not getting easier from an outside perspective with Manchester United, but I think that they have the talent and the ambition to maybe win another couple cups again, maybe try to get to the cup final, make a run in the Champions League, and then stick around in the league as long as you can, as long as you qualify for top 4.
I think those are all realistic. It is going to be tough for them to kind of compete on all fronts like they kind of were up to a point last season, right? Obviously you're winning one domestic cup final, winning one domestic cup, getting to a final in the other. I think there was a point where they were within like 4 points of Arsenal and City in midpoint of the season, so there was almost even like a potential domestic treble in the works. And then obviously now taking a step up from Europa into Champions League, that's a different beast. So I think those are all pretty realistic goals. We have a segment that we like to do on here called Buy or Sell, where we'd like to kind of come up with potential scenarios or predictions and see if we can get people to buy in on this or if they're going to sell it. So I'll give you the first one. Last season, United finished with 75 points. Like we mentioned, that was enough for third in the Premier League. Do you buy or sell that United will finish with more points in the Premier League this season?
It was a really tough thing about this one because I feel like it's going to be about the same. So it's like whatever I say, it may not even really like it could be 74.
Yeah,
So I guess I'll go with buy. But yeah, I don't think they improve upon it that much. But I don't think they drop off that much either.
yeah. I mean, listen, again, it's not yet August, so we'll take these with a grain of salt, but we will revisit them at some point and
Yeah.
just see maybe how close we got. So we'll put Colin down for it'll be close, but optimistic. We're buying it.
Yeah.
Next one, we'll go into Europe. Obviously, United back in the Champions League again this season. Do you buy or sell United advancing beyond the first knockout stage in the Champions League?
I'm gonna buy on this one too. We've seen even under Solskjaer a lot of performances from this squad in cup competitions got them far. They got to semifinals pretty often domestically. The Europa League, they got to the final, and then this past season they got to the quarterfinal. So I'm thinking they at the very least get past the round of 16. We could draw Atletico Madrid again, and it's like 180 minutes of suffer ball. We lose
Yes.
on aggregate, but actually no, I don't think it can happen because
Well, I
Atletico
was just
Madrid
gonna say, do you know
qualify.
what
Yeah,
what pot you would be in for the draw? Like, are you guys a pot two team or have you dropped down to pot three?
I think it's pot three.
Okay,
Um,
because that kind of
so
changes whether or not you have a good chance at
yeah,
winning your
it could be
group
a really
or
tough group.
yeah.
But
Because then you get stuck with the winners of somebody else's group, and maybe you end up with like a really shitty Real Madrid draw, and it's like, you know,
we're gonna get another like was it PSG Dortmund
yeah,
group stage or something like that.
uphill the whole way. Nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. Although at least if we draw PSG, they probably won't have Mbappe.
True, very true. All right, we'll look at some player goals for this season. I tried to make this one as close as I could. We all know Marcus Rashford is going to be the man that is going to be assigned with scoring goals for United this season. So I'm going to put two players together. I'm going to put Anthony and Jadon Sancho. Do you think they can combine for more goals than Marcus Rashford next season? Jadon Sancho looked pretty good in preseason in that match against Arsenal. He had a little bit more pace than maybe we've seen in recent months, and that's kind of what we expected from him when he came over from Dortmund. So maybe he has a resurgent season, or maybe like we talked about with Anthony, maybe he's kind of bedded in now, used to the Premier League, used to Ten Hag's tactics, and he can kind of shine a little bit more than he did last season. So do you buy the duo of Anthony and Jadon Sancho scoring more goals combined than the man up top, Marcus Rashford?
I'm going to sell, but it's going to be a positive sell. It's been made clear by Eric Ten Hag over the last week that playing Jadon Sancho as a center forward in preseason games has been intentional. They want to see what he can do as a sort of false nine. He's looked good. He's quick. He showed that against Arsenal on his goal. And he's a really clever player on the ball. I think if he's kind of operating next to Bruno Fernandes in the advanced midfield role, he could do well there. He creates space and opportunities for Marcus Rashford, but that's part of the reason why I'm selling. I think if that's going to be the case, same with a young striker coming in, because it doesn't look like we're getting Harry Kane or Mbappe, unfortunately. Rashford's going to have to be the primary goal scorer again. So I think Sancho and Antony, even if they take steps up, as players this next season, I think the focus is still going to be get Rashford the ball, get him in front of goal, create space for him. So I think Rashford, maybe even improves upon 30 goals this next season.
Yeah, that would be quite the return, but I certainly think it's doable. And Rashford was always a guy that I was surprised when he had that dip of form a few seasons ago. He always seemed like he was on that upward trajectory, and in a weird way, I'm kind of happy to see him, thriving again, because that's really what the expectations were for him for a couple of years there.
Mm-hmm. And people forget too that the 2 years before his dip in form, he had 20 goals at least each season. So
Yeah.
Even when he's not the primary goal scorer, he's one of the best at running into space behind defenses from that left hand side. And it seems like Eric Ten Hag knows how to move the pieces to make that happen for him.
He's probably also the heir apparent for Harry Kane in the England national team, right? Or is there somebody else that I'm missing?
Yeah, we could do another full hour pod on Gareth Southgate's squad collection.
Okay,
Squad
that's also
selection.
true. You're right.
So, as I would have loved to see Rashford more at the World Cup last year, just as a United fan and England supporter. But yeah, we'll see. We'll have to see on
TBD.
Yeah,
That's very fair. All right, we have one more buy or sell for you, Colin. Then we'll let you go. A stat that I kind of was surprised at when I was doing some research for this podcast: Old Trafford was a fortress for United last season. Just one loss, and that was the very first match, the opening match against Brighton in the whole Premier League season last year. So I'm going to hit you with this one: buy or sell. Manchester United go undefeated at Old Trafford in the Premier League next year.
yeah, I'd love to buy it because it really does feel like Old Trafford has a fear factor again. But I mean, the Premier League's just so good, even outside of the big six, if we can even call it that anymore, given Chelsea and Spurs. But there's just so many talented teams, and in particular, there's just been this influx of really smart, clever managers. We see at Brighton, the Graham Potter was a bit of a find for them, and then as soon as he leaves, they go and get De Zerbi or Roberto De Zerbi, who has them playing lights out. Really, really exciting players across the league. So unfortunately, I don't think they go undefeated at Old Trafford next season, but that I don't think that'll be a knock against them or the crowd there. They're really behind the new manager. I think last season, it really showed in those games against City early on in the season, Liverpool and Arsenal. I mean, that was the loudest it seemed like Old Trafford had been since the Sir Alex days. It really seems like it's a good place to watch football again. So excited for that.
Yeah, I think if you had bought that, I wouldn't have, gone to bat against you on it, but I think it would have been a very optimistic choice because, I mean, like you said, any team on any given day in the Premier League right now can pull out a win. So it was very impressive to me when I saw like just how long United managed to go unbeaten at home. All right. Well, Colin, thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome. We really appreciate it. Can you just remind our listeners one more time where they can find you or if they want to hear more on your Manchester United thoughts and opinions?
Yeah. So our podcast is called the Fergie Fledglings. You can find it on Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcast. I don't know if Stitcher's still a thing. I may have made myself.
Oh, it is.
Old. Okay, cool. Score. And then you can find my writing as well as the writing of many others at thebusbybabe.com. It's SB Nation's Manchester United site, so be sure to check us out. We've got some cool stuff coming out. I got to interview Brian Robson, so we've got a piece out on that, and we'll have a little bit of that on our podcast coming out soon, and then a conversation of me stammering through questions with Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Rafael Varane, and Diogo Dalot. Yeah, I was,
very nice.
I mean, there at the end of the day, I got 8 minutes with them, and I was very hot at the top of a bus in New Jersey on the side of a road somewhere. But you know what? It was a really good experience. So, we'll have some good content out for you, and you can follow me on Twitter at Colin the Shots 95. So,
all right.
Thanks for having me, Scott. This has been great.
Well, Colin is cooking. He's got tons out there. Please give him a follow, give him a subscribe. But that'll do it for today's podcast. Everyone, thanks for listening. And we'll catch you guys next week with another episode of State of the Club podcast.